Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz of Temple Israel of Norfolk, speaking to you from the pulpit of my synagogue. This is the week before Labor Day, and my message has to do with Labor Day. It is entitled, "The Dignity of Labor, the Sanctity of Rest, and the Hypocrisy of False Friends." So you should understand that there's a measure of historical and social criticism that's about to follow. This coming Monday, Americans will celebrate Labor Day. Perhaps a few know its general history. Fewer still, perhaps, know the hypocrisy at its entrance into the world. We know that with the Industrial Revolution and the emergence of a new class of factory workers, there were profound dislocations in society. Factory work, as opposed to the older cottage industry system, created a suddenly uneven playing field in labor management relations. The horrors of sweatshop work spread from England, where the Industrial Revolution first came to fruition, eastward throughout Europe, and across the Atlantic to North America. Calls to ameliorate the lot of the worker were sounded on both sides of the Atlantic. In Europe, the conservative governments of Bismarck in Germany and Disraeli in Great Britain passed legislation granting some guarantees to workers. They did so not because they were suddenly filled with the milk of human kindness, but because they feared revolution. In late 19th century America, there were no comparable initiatives. Unemployment was considered a symptom of character failure. Reformers themselves worried that too generous public employment was a moral minus. Josephine Shaw Lowell, founder of the New York City Charity Organization Society, wrote, quote, "Relief work, to be a benefit and not an injury, must be continuous, hard, and underpaid." Even that stance was too redistributionist for most of those in power. When the New York State Legislature passed a program of public works to allow the unemployed to receive payment for work rendered to the state, Governor Russell Flowers vetoed the bill with these words, "In America, the people support the government. It is not the province of the government to support the people." Nonetheless, workers began to vote, to elect representatives sympathetic to their concerns, and to advance legislative remedies to the worst social aspects of unregulated capitalism. This is the context for the creation of the secular holiday, Labor Day. One of the co-founders of the holiday of Labor Day, Matthew Maguire, was a local political leader, an alderman in the industrial city of Paterson, New Jersey, by the way, my hometown. Even before any legislatures took up the call for a holiday to honor the laborer, New York City saw the first Labor Day parade, September 5th, 1882. Maguire and his fellow labor leader, Peter Miguire, the two had each called for the holiday in 1882, were in attendance. The parade became an annual event and spread to other cities. The holiday gained official sanction over the next decade plus. Between 1887 and 1894, 23 states enacted a Labor Day holiday. Congressional sponsors of Senate Bill 730 from 1893 introduced the bill to establish a national Labor Day in August 1893. A companion bill passed the House. The bill languished for 10 months without debate. But when Senate leaders reached their own consensus, the bill advanced in days. Gee, does that sound familiar to us in 2022? At that point, President Grover Cleveland signed it into law. Before we praise or condemn, as the case may be, President Cleveland as the boon companion of the common worker, let's remember the context of his 1894 declaration. It was the, quote, horrible year of American economic history, the most painful year in the half-century between the conclusion of the Civil War and the First World War. The Depression of 1893 had created a massive cadre of the unemployed. The American expression, Coxey's Army, refers to one of the many delegations of the unemployed who came to the nation's capital to petition for relief. Unlike the barbarians of January 6, 2021, they did not come to break and enter the grounds of our secular cathedral. No relief was forthcoming. Government was unwilling, and private compassion was unable to meet the massive needs of the hour. Those who had jobs were forced to swallow pay cut after pay cut, and were told to be glad that they had a job at all. With a minimum wage still a half century in the future, conditions were unendurable. At least 1,394 strikes were called in 1894, involving a total of 660,425 workers displaced because of strikes. A quarter of them were mine workers. Their strike was quickly broken with the help of the Illinois State Militia, and they settled for reduced wages. Dwarfing even the mine strike was the labor unrest in the railway industry. Workers struck the giant Pullman Car Company in May 1894. Their grievances were acute because they were suffering a double distress. The Pullman Company lowered their wages, but kept the rent high in the Pullman Company town in which most of the workers lived. George Pullman, the owner, had refused to meet with the workers' delegation. He claimed that his company had lost money during the 1893 Depression, a loss that he was simply sharing with his workers. But the economics were that the company lost $52,000 in contracts and saved $60,000 in reduced wages. As Judy Collins sang in the 1960s, "Why do they have friends at the top? We've got nothing, dying in holes, holes in our bellies and holes in our clothes. We're poor, and the poor stay poor." Over the 2 months of the Pullman strike, much of American railroad traffic was paralyzed, except in the Deep South, where labor had not been successfully organized. At one point, 250,000 workers in 27 states were out on strike. But internecine strife amongst labor unions weakened the strike. Illinois Governor John Peter Altgeld and Chicago Mayor John Hopkins attempted to handle the strike nonviolently, but President Grover Cleveland insisted on the path of confrontation, sending 12,000 Army troops and thousands of U.S. Marshals to block the boycott from preventing rail traffic. In the confrontation, troops killed or wounded 87 strikers. The strike was broken. The trains delivered goods to customers, goods which the workers themselves could not afford. That was the immediate context of President Cleveland signing the congressional bill that created Labor Day. One wonders, window dressing, political damage control, or simple hypocrisy? Now let's switch to the Jewish side of the aisle. What are the core lessons of our Jewish tradition about labor? First, work is part of the world we live in. In the Garden of Eden story, the first human was set in the garden, le'ovda u'leshomra, to till it and to tend it. Work was the expected course of human existence. In the rabbinic commentary to the Garden of Eden story, when the serpent speaks to the woman, the rabbis ask, where was the man at that moment? And one of their answers was that at that very moment, God was taking the man around the garden, showing him the different ecological zones, explaining which areas were good for the cultivation of what kind of crops. Idleness was not the ideal even in Eden. In this connection, let us remember that not all work is waged. That is ultimately a matter of social values and arrangements. Volunteer endeavors can be life-enhancing as well. But work by definition means making a change in the world around us, natural or social. And Judaism considers that a good thing when done in good faith. Again, the Ten Commandments enjoin labor as well as rest. Sheshet yamim ta'avod v'yasita kol melachtecha. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. Sabbath is beautiful not as a replacement for productivity, but as that which rescues it from becoming a curse. As the teacher of our generation, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, put it, labor is a blessing, toil is the misery of man. Idleness is not our goal. The second core Jewish lesson about labor: all honest work, waged or not, is honorable. When Moses invites the second generation of Israelites, the children of the Exodus generation, to ratify the covenant first concluded at Sinai, he explicitly includes the most menial workers of that society. You are stationed here today, all of you, before the Lord your God, your heads, your tribes, your elders, your overseers, and all the way to the hewer of your wood and the drawer of your water, the lowest jobs in that ladder. You're all here to raise you up for God today as a people, and God will be your God. Deuteronomy chapter 29, verses 9 through 12. The theory of the leisure class, so acidly drawn in the Gilded Age by the sociologist Thorsten Veblen, a theory explaining why the elite consider themselves too good or too refined to work, this is alien to Judaism. Hence, the bitter denunciation of the women in the idle elite found in the prophecies of Amos, chapter 4, verses 1 through 2. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan on the hill of Samaria, you who defraud the poor, who rob the needy, who say to their husbands, bring and let's carouse. My Lord swears by his holiness, behold, days are coming upon you when you will be exiled and flung on the refuse heap. Harsh words for those ladies of leisure, but not because they were wealthy, rather because their wealth had made them scornful of labor and insensitive to the poor, not because they could enjoy leisure, but because they could not share their good fortune beyond their class lines. The third core Jewish lesson about labor: God is always on the side of the weaker party, because God is the ultimate address for the cry of the oppressed. The books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy envision that the primitive egalitarianism of the Israelites in the wilderness may give way to an economically stratified society. Leviticus tries to prevent that from happening by promulgating a radical land use law, Leviticus 25, in which land, the ultimate source of wealth in that society, will always revert to its original family of owners, a noble attempt to forestall the multi-generational poverty that is a stain upon so many societies, including especially our own, the wealthiest nation in history. Deuteronomy, perhaps more sober in outlook, knows that, quote, Ki lo yahdal dal min haaretz. The pauper will not cease from the midst of the land. Deuteronomy 15, verse 11. Its response is to enjoin an open hand, an open heart. There's a stick as well as a carrot. The carrot is that God will bless us when we live generously. The stick is the converse. Chapter 15, verse 9. Hishamer lecha, watch yourself, lest there be in your heart a base thought, and you look meanly at your brother the pauper, and you do not give to him. And he call to the Lord against you, and it be an offense in you. By that standard, our America failed God's test in 1894. And there are those who would like it to fail again in 2022. The proclamation of Labor Day was a bright spot on an otherwise dark horizon. Let us work for a world in which the fruit of someone's labor is truly appreciated, in which the laborer is not simply a human machine, but a fellow child of God, in which we can labor and rest and live our span of years in meaningful productivity. Happy Labor Day, and more importantly, a meaningful Labor Day to all. Amen.